With that, I'd like to go to the news updates. Let's start with you, Medea. What's happening on Capitol Hill? I know a lot.
Yeah. Well, first, remember, you can introduce yourselves in the chat. We'll see who's farthest away, and I have a feeling it might be one of our speakers. And that you can use the chat to put your questions in there. Let's see. Well, I'm part of the group that has been going every day to Capitol Hill, and it's a crazy time now. We're going to have the vote tomorrow on the joint resolutions of disapproval introduced by Bernie Sanders. Finally going to have that vote. It was introduced by him with three other co-sponsors, and those are Peter Welsh, Markey, and Schatz. And then we have Van Hollen and Warren who have said signed on to it. And we will see tomorrow. It's going to be very exciting. No matter what, we know we're not doing this because we think it's going to pass. We're doing this because we think it's important as a benchmark to see where the senators are, where each of our senators is right now is so important for us as we move forward and keep pushing them to stop sending weapons to Israel. So it's going to be a very, very important vote. This is the first time in US history that there will actually be a vote on limiting some weapons to Israel. So very historic. Stay tuned to see. And of course, that's what we're going to be doing in our action part, right, Marcy? So everybody's.
Yes. Please do stick around. We'll be calling Capitol Hill another time. I know we're all calling every day. I am. I'm sure you are, to say to our U.S. senators co-sponsor these joint resolutions.
Very important that you call. We know that AIPAC has been issuing ads out in 20 different states, and they have their people calling, and we have a lot of people calling. I think we're making more calls than them, but we got to keep it up until the very last minute, which is probably in the afternoon tomorrow. There is another horrible bill right now, and that is over in the House side. That's called HR 9495. And that is a bill that would allow the Treasury Department and now the Trump administration to decide what groups it considers terrorists and take away their nonprofit status, which means basically doing away with them. And it is a very, very dangerous bill that all of the civil rights groups are opposed to. Unfortunately, when it came up for a vote last week, we thought we had defeated it because it didn't get the 2/3 that it needed. Now it's going to come up for a vote again, and they only need a simple majority. Now, last time there were 52 Democrats that voted in favor of this terrible bill, only one Republican who voted the right way, that was Tom Massey. So we have been going to the offices several times of those 52 to say, what is wrong with you? Why are you voting for this horrific bill that would give the Trump administration the opportunity to get rid of whatever groups it wanted to? It certainly will go after groups doing the Palestine work, but they will be able to take out any group they want, environmental groups, Black Lives Matter groups, immigrant rights groups. So anyway, we have a lot of work to do, and that's going to come up for a vote on Thursday. So we've been working hard on that, and we encourage you to also be calling your representative to tell them to vote no on 9495.
Thank you, Medea. And we'll be sending out, Grace often sends out a recap of our Code Pink Congress the next day. So you get all this information tomorrow. Please.
And one thing, Marcy, I forgot to say is to please, Grace, if you could post the article that Nicholas Davies and I just wrote about Marco Rubio, 8 reasons why he would be a disastrous Secretary of State. Thank you.
Anybody who's been watching your Instagram videos with Marco Rubio knows what a disaster that guy is. All right, let's thank you so much, Medea, for the news update. And let's get on the phone later tonight in this broadcast to call our U.S. senators one more time. Okay, Hania, you've got some news updates on Trump's picks, yeah?
I mean, as Medea just mentioned, Marco Rubio, what a disaster for such an important position. But as we know, the next 4 years, Marcy, under the potential second Trump administration, could have even more concerning, could be more concerning than the past. His rumored picks for key positions in 2025 underscore a very alarming shift in the U.S. foreign policy priorities. And they focus, I would say, more on loyalty and ideological alignment than on expertise and experience. None of these folks that I'm about to mention here really do have foreign policy experience other than they align ideologically with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. I would say among the most contentious appointees are Mike Huckabee, slated to be the ambassador to Israel. Despite lacking any diplomatic credentials, his hardline stances, including opposition to ceasefire and Gaza conflict, indicates a very aggressive and one-sided approach to Middle East diplomacy. Another very concerning pick is Elise Stefanik, who's nominated as an ambassador to the United Nations, who similarly lacks experience in terms of diplomacy, but has been a staunch critic of the UN. These selections suggest a very troubling departure from a nuanced international relations, and they raise concerns about how the U.S. will navigate complex global challenges in the next 4 years. Some of the other concerning picks include conservative TV personality and former veteran Pete Hegseth, who is now being considered as the defense secretary pick. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, in 2019, he urged Trump to pardon U.S. service members who had been accused of war crimes. Stephen Witkoff, for example, as the Middle East envoy, and Mike Waltz as national security advisor. Witkoff, a real estate executive with absolutely no diplomatic background, is expected to handle one of the world's most volatile regions. And so it remains to be seen what happens within the next 4 years. Such selections really do highlight the risk of a poorly coordinated, ideologically driven international strategy that could destabilize those regions that are of most concern in the next 4 years. So we shall see, which is, I think, it's really important for us to continue the organizing that we do. So
thank you so much, Hania Jadad Barnes, for that update on Trump's picks. Bizarre. Also included in that group is Tulsi Gabbard. She really stands out as somebody who, at least in the past, has voiced concerns about endless wars. Some people say it's not the war on Gaza she's concerned about, it's regime change wars. We'll see, but she has been nominated by Trump to be the director of national intelligence, overseeing 17, I think, intelligence agencies. Big job. All right, today, CODEPINK, along with World Beyond War, Veterans for Peace, Progressive Democrats of America's End Wars Working Group, I think I said Veterans for Peace, and the Peace in Ukraine Coalition, which CODEPINK launched with a number of other organizations after Russia invaded Ukraine, to say we need a ceasefire, we need diplomacy, we don't need nuclear brinkmanship. All of us we issued a press release saying that we denounce President Biden's decision to authorize long-range missile strikes, U.S. missiles, into the heart of Russia. These are the two most nuclear-powered nations, the United States and Russia. What is he thinking? This is another red line that President Biden, or whoever is running the White House, I don't know, has crossed, but we are sounding the alarm. Unfortunately, I just read in The Hill that most Democrats and Republicans are fully behind this. So we need a wake-up call on Capitol Hill. Apparently, 6 missiles were shot today in a pre-dawn raid from Ukraine. And again, these are U.S. missiles. So another campaign, right? You can see the press release on the CODEPINK website. With that, let's introduce our guests. We have 2 guests tonight, wonderful guests. We have Antony Lowenstein, who is the author of The Palestine Laboratory and just launched a web podcast by the same name. And we have Nora Lester Murad, who has become a good friend in a short time. And she is one of the key organizers of Drop the ADL from Our Schools. First, let's go to Medea to introduce Antony.
Well, Antony has already won the contest for coming to us from the farthest away tonight. Antony Lowenstein is an Australian-German investigative journalist, podcaster, and best-selling author of The Palestine Laboratory: How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation Around the World. Lowenstein is the co-editor of After Zionism, a collection of the world's leading writers and thinkers who outline how the one-state solution can be achieved in the Middle East. His other books include Pills, Powder, and Smoke, Disaster Capitalism, and My Israel Question. He also has made some wonderful documentary films. He lives now in Sydney, Australia, but was based in East Jerusalem from 2016 to 2020 and visited Gaza several times. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us. Except you're muted.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yes, wonderful. Medea, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, CODEPINK, for having me. It's really wonderful to be here. I may be very, very, very far away. It's actually Wednesday here at lunchtime. So I'm in a whole different day, different time zone. But I wanted to say maybe a few things, a bit about what the book's about, what the podcast is about, but just the broader issues about the Israeli arms industry, which I think often gets ignored in this conversation, that we so often talk about the US supporting Israel and giving them unlimited amounts of money and weapons. All that is basically true, but it's only part of the picture. This book they wrote came out last year called The Palestine Laboratory, and the podcast, which we just released with Dropsite News, which is a relatively new investigative website launched by certain so-called refugees from The Intercept. You can find this all your podcast platforms, Spotify, etc. Essentially is looking at how Israel, pretty much from its birth in 1948, and it's accelerated after 1967, the Six-Day War, has really used Palestinians as guinea pigs, essentially, to test a whole range of weapons and surveillance tech, and then sell those and market those to countless nations around the world. We're talking about, we don't actually even know, really, how many nations Israel has sold weapons to in the last half century plus. I estimate anywhere between 125 and 140. So essentially the majority of nations on the planet. And we're talking in the modern age about spyware, biometric tools, drones, including quadcopters, killer drones, something we've seen Israel using in Gaza since October 7. And the book, in some ways, and the podcast too, although they're obviously different, I'm also working on a film on this issue, which hopefully will be out soon. So look out for that in the coming months. Is really, I guess, challenging two things. One, there's so much knowledge, I think, especially on the left, and I'm sure in this crowd here, of US support for dictatorships around the world since World War II. Pretty much any repressive state, Washington has backed it. What is far less known is that Israel was often doing exactly the same thing, either with the US or separately. So we're talking about everything from apartheid South Africa during its worst years of oppression, to the genocidal regime in Guatemala in the 80s, to the Iranian regime before 1979. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and the book details that. And then in the modern era, I explain how Israel in some ways has successfully weaponized 9/11. And 9/11 obviously happened in the US, not Israel. But Israel sold itself as a solution to the world's paranoia or fears, often created fears. And the Israeli arms industry, for a relatively tiny country, Israel has about the 9th biggest arms industry in the world. In 2023, which is the latest figures that we have, Israel sold around 13.1 billion US dollars, which is massive. Now, the US is number one. The US is number one arms dealer in the world and sells about 45% of the world's weapons. And the US arms industry, in fact, the global arms industry, is soaring because of the war in Gaza, because of the war in Ukraine, because of many reasons. And I fear that'll continue under Trump, if not worsen. But the fact that Israel is the 9th biggest arms dealer in the world for a relatively small country is so often not explained. And it's a lot to do with the fact that Israel has used Palestine not just as a testing ground, but also, I would argue, as an insurance policy, that when many, many nations after the Six-Day War in 1967 were really upset publicly and privately about what Israel was doing, this is really right at the beginning of the occupation, Israel would often promote itself as the solution to other countries' problems. So what I mean by that is country X would come to Israel, or Israel would go to them and say, we would want to deal with our minority problem, our Muslims, our whoever it may be that we don't like, our dissidents, our journalists. Can you help us? And Israel was very happy to do so. That's how they made friends, so to speak. And in the modern era, we're talking about everyone from, including to this day, by the way, Myanmar, after the UN found that it had committed genocide in the last decade, much of the Arab world, because it's worth saying, since October 7, note, not one Arab state has cut ties with Israel, not one. Now, they've been critical, they've expressed their disquiet, their anguish. No one's cut ties, and no one will, because I'm not talking about here Arab people, I'm talking about Arab leaders, whether it's Saudi, Jordan, Egypt, etc. Firstly, most of them have contempt for Palestinians and have for decades. Secondly, they very much privately support Israel's goals, which is attempting to destroy Hamas and Hezbollah, which they won't succeed in, but that's what they're claiming they want to do. They have no issue really with Israeli occupation and dehumanization of Palestinians. Many of these nations in the Arab world see their future success as going to Washington via Israel. And I explain in the book that in the last really 10 years, although it's been existing longer than that, many Arab states have bought some of Israel's most sophisticated spyware and weapons. Why? Because they're petrified of Arab Spring 2.0. They're petrified of their own people rising up, essentially. So they're using so-called world's best Israeli spyware. Now, I think maybe I should stop in a minute, Marcy, and take questions. I don't want to speak too long. I can speak longer if you'd like, but
Sure. Well, we do have a few questions.
yeah, please. Well, why don't we do questions anyway? That's the summary, and yeah, I have much more to say.
Okay. So the first question is Israel selling weapons they themselves produce or reselling the weapons they get from the US? Where are these weapons coming from?
The short answer is both. Israel makes a lot of its own weapons. Israel has very successful, profitable arms industries, companies, Elbit, Rafael, and others, whose profits are soaring, by the way, since October 7. And so sometimes they're producing their own weapons or surveillance tech in Israel. But of course, as many people on this call will know, so much of the US so-called aid that goes to Israel is partly to assist in the weapons industry. So the answer is both. And the only way this would ever really stop, in my view, because it's not going to come initially from the US, sadly, is countries imposing arms embargoes. And that's so far as a few nations since October 7 have said they'll no longer buy weapons or surveillance tech. The country that comes to mind is Colombia. There are others. And that needs to be far deeper than what we've had so far. And I can't think of any other nations, happy to be corrected on this, that have come out and said in the last 13 or so months, we will no longer buy Israeli tech. Because just finally on this point, a lot of nations that are expressing anger with what Israel's doing in Gaza and Lebanon, believe me, actually are excited about it and want to buy the weapons and the tech that Israel's using in Gaza and Lebanon for themselves. I know this because I've spoken to some of them and I've seen them talking about the global arms fairs. That's some of the work that I've done investigating. And so, as I often say, look at what people do rather than what they say, or countries, I should say.
Thank you, Anthony. And while we're asking you questions and engaging in this dialogue, Grace, if you could please bring Robert Jureski in, because he is our coordinator of the UN World Court team, and he may have some other thoughts about the response they've been getting at the United Nations. So, Medea, question.
Well, there are questions in the chat of people wanting to know about the contempt you said that the Arab states have for Palestinians, and what do you mean by that?
When I say that, to be clear, I'm not talking about the majority of Arab people in the Arab world. I'm talking about Arab leaders and Arab elites. In the last years, and this, of course, was happening before Trump was president, obviously Trump put in place the so-called Abraham Accords, which was this, frankly, it was an arms deal, which was sold as a normalization deal between Israel and a handful of Arab states. Trump will certainly try to continue that with a deal between Israel, the US, and Saudi. What I mean by that is that over the decades, long before October 7, long before 9/11, some Arab states have undeniably taken in certain Palestinians. Lebanon has, Egypt has, Jordan has. But if you ask, as I have and spent a lot of time in those countries, Palestinians are treated as second-class citizens at best in all those countries. Since October 7, very, very few Arab states have taken any Palestinians at all. Yes, Egypt has taken quite a few, but let's be clear what that is. The system that allowed Palestinians to leave Gaza to get into Egypt required essentially paying bribes to an Egyptian company, which was backed by the state, to allow Palestinians to escape the genocide and go into Egypt. The Palestinians that currently are in Egypt, there are tens of thousands of them, are in permanent limbo. They can't work legally. They can't send their kids to school. I have Palestinian friends who are in that situation right now. In the broader sense, since October 7, no Arab state has cut ties, not one. So what I'm saying is that there needs to be, and of course, if you ask the majority of Arab people in their countries what they think about Israel normalization, Palestinians, in the majority of cases, this is based on polling, they say they don't support their countries normalizing relations with Israel. This is also the case in Egypt and Jordan. The only reason Egypt and Jordan remain so-called friends with Israel is the US gives them aid, a bribe, every year. It's the only reason. It's the only reason that they're still friends with Israel. So what I say in all these relationships are surface deep. That, yes, Arab elites have a reason. If you ask a lot of high-tech Arab leaders in Dubai, they're excited about the fact that they can go to Israel. Israelis like going to Dubai for holiday. They're selling a lot of high-tech weapons and surveillance tech to each other. Fine. That's not the majority of people in those countries. So what's what I mean, that there is contempt by many in the Arab elites towards Palestinians. It has been for decades, and it's shameful.
Hania.
Thank you so much, Anthony. One thing that's really interesting is that, as you know already, during the Iran-Iraq War, Israel was also discreetly supplying Iran with weapons and spare parts that were left over from Shah's era. So a really interesting question that came up in the chat is, should the US stop sending arms to Israel? Would Israel have enough weapons to continue the war and genocide against Gaza and Palestinians?
I mean, the short answer is America should stop it yesterday. So yes. Would the war stop tomorrow if the US stopped selling weapons? No. However, Israel cannot conduct its wars in Lebanon and Gaza and elsewhere without US weapons. It's not just about weapons, it's also logistics, diplomatic support, political support. So the short answer is the war wouldn't stop the next day, but it would stop pretty damn soon. Israel knows that, which is why throughout this whole 13-month process, as everyone on this call would probably know, there's never really been any interest on the US side to stop that weapons flow. There hasn't. There's been certain officials, as we read, who have resigned, who have been very critical, and I give them plaudits for doing so. But the US military and political establishment has been very happy to continue selling weapons and will continue to do so. So yes, I guess the short answer is it would make a massive difference if the US stopped selling them, as it would, by the way, if Germany would. And Germany is the second biggest provider of weapons after Israel, after the US.
Anthony, at this point, I'd like to bring in Robert Jureski to the conversation.
Hi, Robert.
Head of our UN team in New York City, has been in front of various missions for a year now and meeting with representatives and ambassadors, urging first support for South Africa at the International Court of Justice in its case against Israel for genocide, and now recently urging a complete trade embargo, arms, tech, fuel. So, Robert, bring us up to date about what's happening at the United Nations.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having this discussion and for wanting to hear about this. Our efforts in New York are because we have the UN headquarters here, and because of that, we can reach into the foreign ministries of countries all over the world, ones that are supposedly friendly, like Turkey and Brazil, and ones that are not so friendly, like Germany and well, the United States. We just recently, what's happening at the UN recently is that we held demonstrations in solidarity with Turkish activists who have been blocking ports, taking over ships, going to offices of the company SOCAR, because there's supposedly Erdogan, an enemy of Israel, has been declaring that there's a trade embargo against Israel because of what Israel's doing to the Palestinians. And that was announced in May, but Turkish journalists have exposed this as a lie. And Turkey has a very powerful role to play in the ongoing wanton murder of Palestinians because of all the oil that passes through Turkish territory from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, where Erdogan, would he really want to stop Israel, could threaten to cut that off. It's a Turkish pipeline, and it goes to Seyhan and then by ship to Israel. So
What about this week?
what's that?
What about this week?
That was earlier this week, these demonstrations in solidarity with Turkish activists who have been demonstrating in cities across Turkey, also in Japan. There have been demonstrations in Croatia, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, about, well, exposing this hypocrisy and trying to get Erdogan to respond to his people and to world opinion, which is disgusted by what Israel's doing. Later this week, we're going to be going to the German mission to the UN and demonstrating there. They recently passed a bill in Parliament, again, equating Zionism with Judaism, and so trying to silence criticism of Israel's brutal policy. So there are going to be anti-Zionist religious Jews. There are going to be, secular Jews. There are going to be lots of activists in New York who oppose what Israel's doing. We have met with like other missions. We try to have people participate who have a history with the country, either origins or friends or some kind of business relationship, something to tie into the country we're meeting with. If folks on this call have people in New York with relations to key countries, Brazil still trading with Israel, South Africa also, unfortunately, sending coal, selling coal. If you have relations with countries in Europe, we'd like to get the EU's the biggest trading partner of Israel, and economic sanctions against Israel by the EU would be devastating. So it would be great if you would contact our project, the World Court Campaign, CODEPINK's World Court Campaign. I'll put in the chat how to reach us. And thanks a lot.
Thank you. And thank you for being in front of the US mission as well this week.
Yeah.
All right.
We tell the ambassador, we know the ambassadors, the ambassador and the deputy ambassadors very well at this point. And we embarrass them, frankly, in front of the diplomatic community that is milling about First Avenue and 45th Street and agrees with us to a large degree. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Robert, and your team at the United Nations. We are so grateful for the work that you're doing. And Anthony, it is a pleasure to have you on. I don't know how much time you have. We have one other guest, and then we're going to do a Capitol calling party. We invite you to stay with us and for people to pose questions to you in the chat as well. So
can we just hear Anthony's response to what Robert's working on?
Sure. Yes. Any thoughts?
I mean, I'm encouraged to hear that. I mean, I've also know lots about the reality that Turkey, Erdogan, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth, as we say. I mean, the thing is, I think there are some European states, Belgium, Ireland, Spain, who are certainly more sympathetic than, Hungary or others. Obviously, Europe is taking a right and far right turn, which deeply concerns all of us. But I think there are some European states that are far more sympathetic to, would they impose a full trade embargo? Possibly not. Would they potentially not buy weapons from Israel? Maybe. They wouldn't probably admit it publicly because it's still seen as very controversial, which it frankly shouldn't be. So no, I think there is a real possibility of lobbying and pressuring and embracing and embarrassing. I mean, just finally finding the thing that really, to me, what the challenge is taking this massive global public outrage that we've seen in your country and many others, mine, and putting that into political action. Now, CODEPINK is doing that to your very big credit. But I think I see a lot of that not happening in many other places. It's taking that massive political anger and outrage at what Israel's doing and putting that into some kind of tangible action, pressure on politician X or Y. And yeah, so I'd encourage people to do that. What that looks like is going to be different in every country. I know most people on this call are American. But yeah, so I'm encouraged to hear what you guys are doing, is the short answer. It's a struggle. I mean, Trump is going to be a lot,
Yes.
to put it
It's a
mildly.
struggle. We're in it for the struggle. So
know.
thank you so much, Anthony. Let's unmute and thank Anthony for joining us on
Thank you
CodePink
so much.
tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
for
much.
your
Thank
great
you.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Your book,
much.
too.
Thank
Um,
you.
All right. So
Thank
now
you.
we're going to go to our next guest, and Hania will introduce her.
I just want to say how unfortunate that we have such a limited time with some of our speakers because there's so much to unfold tonight. And so we're so grateful to have both of them on this call. It is my honor, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Nora Lester Morad, who is from Drop the ADL from Schools. Nora Lester Morad is an organizer with the recently launched campaign to drop the ADL from schools. She is also an award-winning author of the young adult novel Ida in the Middle, among other books and many articles. Nora serves on the Board of Visualizing Palestine and is a policy member of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. From a Jewish family, Nora raised 3 daughters in the West Bank with her Palestinian husband. While in Palestine, Nora co-founded Dahlia Association for grants to the Palestinian community. Nora shares K-12 teaching and school advocacy resources and can be reached through a blog, which I will link in our chat. Nora, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and talking about Drop the ADL from Schools, though never have I done it in as short a time as 10 minutes. So I'm going to do my best. I think some folks know, but I'd like to say again that there is an ecosystem of organizations that work in the United States and specifically in the K-12 schools that kind of make Zionism, normalize Zionism and compulsory Zionism, if you've heard of that term, in many ways, including through curriculum, through teacher training, through all kinds of things. And one of those organizations is the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. The Anti-Defamation League was founded in 1913, so before the State of Israel, and was always a conservative, pro-state kind of actor, very much grounded in German Jewish experience, trying to assimilate in the United States and reacting in some ways to East European immigration that was seen perhaps as being too left-wing and too poor. So over time, the Anti-Defamation League, like other parts of the mainstream Jewish community, started relating to Israel and working on Zionism. And over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, it's like on steroids. Why is this important? Why does it matter what the kids learn in school? Well, first of all, because those kids grow up and they become the president and the senator and the congressman, et cetera, but they also become the general public who are, by their experience in our schools, predisposed to believe some of the distorted messages of the mainstream media, including very racist messages, and then are unable to fully understand and to take action for social justice because they kind of don't get it. And not only about this issue, about other issues as well. We know we need to educate the population better for social justice. But I'd like to just talk about 4 ways that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, does this that may be out of the awareness of the left, even among those of us who know that the ADL is a problem. Because we know the ADL works with police, we know the ADL worked with South Africa in the past, the ADL has surveilled and continues to surveil movements and communities of color. But I'd like to draw a couple more specific connections to the issue of schools. And again, why does this matter? Why does it matter now during genocide? Is because the work they do in K-12 schools, we try to undo by the time kids get to college. So we're doing remedial education, basically, where the ADL understands, and their ecosystem, they understand that the front line for the narrative war for Palestinian liberation starts in kindergarten. And it starts with books, and it starts with teachers, and it starts with curriculum. So a couple of things that I will mention. The ADL and others in their ecosystem, which you may or may not have heard of, including Facing History and Ourselves, the Institute for Curriculum Services, and others, and more recently, Camera Education Institute. They provide curriculum and professional development, often for free, to schools all across the country. And they also provide these expert consulting services when there are anti-Semitic incidents in schools. The schools will often call the ADL or one of their partner organizations like Jewish Community Relations Council, American Jewish Committee, and others, different ones in different local areas. And through these various ways of interacting with schools, they more deeply entrench the policies of these organizations, which masquerade as educational organizations, but they're just political advocacy organizations acting in the interests of Israel. So these organizations all act on and with an understanding of the conflation between Israel and Judaism. And that's not something that's discussed or explored or problematized. It's just taken as a given and normalized. And with that, they go further and say that anti-Zionist or non-Zionist or even pro-Palestinian speech in schools or materials that uplift Palestinian narratives or even recognize Palestinian histories are unsafe for Jewish children. So this is two kinds of weaponization. They're weaponizing the idea of safety by saying that Jewish children are unsafe when they are exposed to criticism of Israel or to pro-Palestinian narratives. And then they now are going further than just mere conflation and saying that this creates a hostile environment for Jewish children, and hostile environment is illegal under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So they're weaponizing civil rights legislation and concepts against Palestinians and kind of, instrumentalizing Jewish kids in the meantime. The ADL's pedagogy, also, I should note, because many people say, oh, yeah, the ADL is bad politically, but their stuff isn't that bad. Their materials, anti-bias education, what's wrong with that? That's good, right? So we'll just use the anti-bias education and we'll leave the political stuff behind. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. First of all, the ADL's anti-bias education is bad. It is not good. It strips away the opportunity for kids to think about systemic and historic and contextual issues and reduces everything to bias between individual kids. So you said a mean thing to me, you didn't realize it hurt me, now I'm going to tell you it hurt me, and then you're going to apologize to me and we're all going to get along. The amount of space the ADL takes in US schools with this concept is so big that it literally displaces anti-racist and social justice education. You may have heard about No Place for Hate. That's an ADL program. It's an all-school program. Everybody in the school gets involved in No Place for Hate. There's also Walk Against Hate. There's a whole bunch of iterations on this branding they have against hate. I don't even know what hate is. They never talk about inequality or injustice. If they do, the words are kind of thrown in while they're really talking about bias. They kind of throw in those words, but never explore or expand on them anyway. I think most concerning about the ADL and the others in their ecosystem is their policy work. They promote in schools the IHRA definition, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And they also promote very actively anti-BDS laws, which affect teachers who are, in some cases, if you've seen the movie Boycott, they require teachers to sign statements saying they will not boycott Israel, and that's a condition of employment. And they also, the ADL has been a leader in the attacks, legal and other attacks on liberated ethnic studies, which is a movement within education that's grounded in communities of color and reclaiming the and centering the experiences of marginalized communities. And the way they do this is through reputational slander and lawfare. Reputational slander is powerful because all they have to do is say, you're anti-Semitic. And all of a sudden, a teacher is being disciplined, they're put on leave, they've lost their friends, their careers, etc. Believe me, it's happening every day. Our teachers are under attack, not only from the right wing that doesn't want African-American history taught, but from the right wing that doesn't want Palestinian history taught, and they are the same right wing. And they also do lawfare, which is filing of either lawsuits or civil rights complaints, again, claiming that Jewish children are in a hostile environment when they are forced to be exposed to criticism of Israel, which includes anything that uplifts Palestinians. That's my timer. How did I do? I talked really,
Fantastic.
really fast. And I didn't say, what I must say is that our campaign to drop the ADL from schools is it's a national framework within which local people like you out there in CODEPINK land need to do the local organizing. So whether you are a parent, a student, an educator, or a community member, you can go to droptheadlfromschools.org and get materials that will help you find out what ADL is doing in your schools and how to get them out of your schools. And a little hint that may not be apparent is that we can't always only use the political argument that we don't agree with the ADL politically. We also in schools have to use the argument that they are not an educational organization, and that organizations that attack students, teachers, and schools should not be brought in as, quote, partners into schools. They're dangerous and they should not be considered credible as educational partners.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nora, for raising our consciousness about this. I've had the pleasure. Thank you, Vicki. A shout out to Vicki Tamush for introducing me to Nora. Vicki's on the call tonight. We're working, well, a few of us are working on an article on the Echoes and Reflections curriculum that's also sponsored by the ADL in conjunction with the Shoah Foundation and Yad Vashem. And, you know, it's insidious, really. Certainly in some of the units that are trumpeting the ADL's reports on anti-Semitic attitudes. And what are these attitudes based on? They're based on attitudes towards Israel. You know, if you say that Israel is a racist endeavor, oh, that's it. That's anti-Semitic. If you say that some people in Israel act like Nazis, boop, check, you're anti-Semitic. So we've been on the Central Coast of California, we've been testifying before school boards in Santa Barbara, Ventura, San Luis Obispo, saying, heads up, this is coming our way, because now in California, we have a new law just signed by our governor that has established a collaborative, and this is going to be a model for the rest of the country, a collaborative to teach teachers on genocide education and the Holocaust, and the ADL is the driver of this collaborative. So we want to alert everybody to this and say, you know, don't contract with this group. Don't promote this group because they are not teaching the truth. All right, Hania, question.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Nora, are there any, and this is a question that was put in the chat from one of our audience members, are there any Orthodox Jewish community members in this movement to drop ADL, Zionism studies?
So Drop the ADL from Schools is very new. you have hopefully all heard about Drop the ADL, which is a campaign that started in 2020 and helped all of us to understand the ADL as not an ally of progressives. But the Drop the ADL from Schools iteration of that campaign is really new. We launched on October 1st, so that's literally 6 weeks ago. We launched with an open letter to educators that already has 85 organizational signatories, including CODEPINK. Thank you so much. And also we launched with a very large expose in Rethinking Schools magazine, the preeminent social justice magazine for teachers. And so we're a relatively small group of educators and some activists, and most of them are educators, and most of them are not able to have their name out as organizers because it's too dangerous. And none of us are orthodox in that small group. That is to say that everyone is completely welcome to come and organize with us. It is an open movement. We have no staff, we have no money. We just really care a lot about protecting teachers who are teaching. We don't need them to go and do like pro-Palestine propaganda in the schools. That's not the point. The point is that Palestinian narratives and history must be included in schools so that kids can engage with a diversity of points of view and materials critically. And that only that kind of inquiry teaching will inoculate kids against kind of like blindly believing the media that they receive. They need to learn to think for themselves and to think critically.
And I think we need to empower teachers to challenge this kind of indoctrination. And they did that in San Francisco. I heard that teachers walked out when they were subjected to professional development that smeared, vilified peace activists for objecting to genocide.
I love that example. It's a wonderful example. And actually, there are interesting things happening all around the country that I didn't know about until we launched Drop the ADL from Schools. And now people are coming forward. We do have website and social media, and we have a signal chat for educators, which folks can go to the link tree and sign up if you are an educator for that chat. And people are starting to tell stories. Oh, we got the ADL removed as a recommended resource on our state's list of recommended resources. That's a big success. There's other groups where the ADL and their friends are attacking students for going on anti-war walkouts, and these kids are being disciplined. First of all, the principals in some cases tell the kids in advance, you can't say genocide, you can't have red hands, you can't use a map that looks like a map of Palestine. They're telling them things that you can't do, which is very upsetting and troubling. But then, of course, the kids do it anyway because they are brave and they get the issues, and then they get in trouble. And here's something I just want to point out. We all know that the ADL has a close relationship with police. The ADL has in the past and continues, I think, to take our local police to Israel to train in, quote, counterterrorism. The Jewish Voice for Peace has a campaign called Deadly Exchange against these types of relationships. But the close relationship with the police continues. And here's a scenario that ought to be familiar because it's very common. There is a swastika on the 5th grade bathroom. Everybody goes, oh my God, we are 10 seconds away from a Holocaust. Okay. That kind of alarmist sensationalism, which shuts down, our critical thinking because we go into trauma mode, is something the ADL is very, very efficient with. You will see the ADL almost on a daily basis say, anti-Semitism is a 5-alarm fire. Anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been before. It's anti-Semit. We're in the 1930s right now, right? So they're constantly doing that. As a result of that, there's a swastika in the 5th grade bathroom, and nobody knows who did it, but people assume it was Palestinians. They do. Why do they? Because they're pre-designed to pre-set to think about Palestinians as being the primary perpetuators of anti-Semitism, which is not true. It is the right-wing nationalists. And then who do they call? The school calls the ADL and they call the police. So here you have now police being brought into a school for a 5th grade graffiti. I'm not saying that it's okay to have a swastika on the bathroom wall. I am saying this is almost like a school to prison pipeline situation. You do not need to bring an outside organization like the ADL or the police into a school to oversee what is a teachable moment, a teachable moment. You get the kids together, you say there was a swastika. Do you know what it means? Do you know that hurts people? Do you know what it reminds people of? What kind of community do we want to be? And you have that conversation. That's what it is to teach. But that teaching is being shut down because there's a protocol and you've got to do this alarmist thing. You've got to send an email to the entire school community and say you have 0 tolerance for anti-Semitism. Do they do an all school email saying they have no tolerance when there's the N-word in the bathroom or when there's an anti-trans comment in the bathroom? They don't. So this exceptionalizing of anti-Semitism, treating it differently when in fact all forms of bias and discrimination and bigotry are a problem, that is also creating divisions, a million divisions, and distorting the reality of the situation.
Thank you so much, Nora. There's a lot more we could talk about, and I know we have questions, but we do want to call Congress because we have this huge vote coming up tomorrow on blocking weapons to Israel. So let's unmute and thank Nora Lester-Murad for joining us tonight on Code Pink Congress.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Nora. Good
Thank you
work.
so much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo.
All the speakers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marcy, you're muted.
Thank you for staying with us. For now, we're going to go to our Capitol calling party tomorrow. Medea mentioned that there's a huge vote expected in the Senate to block $20 billion worth of weapons to Israel. This is sponsored by Bernie Sanders and a few other senators. Grace put up the script in a minute, but basically, it's hello. We're going to get on the phone, right? And there's a Capitol switchboard phone number that we'll put in the chat, 202-224-3121. And we're going to say, hey, my name is, and I'm your constituent. I urge you to co-sponsor Senator Bernie Sanders' joint resolutions of disapproval to block $20 billion in arms sales to Israel. Israel kills Palestinians as they wait for food, as they seek medical treatment. If you don't oppose this weapon sale, you are telling us that you support these murders. So co-sponsor SJ Res 111 to 116, Stop U.S. Israel Genocide. It is both U.S. Israel Genocide. We always want to say that. All right, so let's do that right now. It'll take about 5 to 10 minutes and make our calls.